Crash landing surprise. Jake wiped his greasy hands on an old rag and stepped back to admire his work. The rusty old pickup truck in front of him now purred like a kitten. He grinned, proud of his handiwork. Just another day at Smith's Auto Repair, the only garage in the small town of Millbrook. Good as new, Mr. Johnson. Jake called out to the old farmer waiting nearby. She'll run for another 10 years. Easy. Mr. Johnson chuckled and tossed Jake the keys. You're a miracle worker, son. What do I owe ya? As Jake tallied up the bill, he glanced at the clock. 5:55 p.m. Almost closing time. He'd been working since dawn, and his stomach growled, reminding him of the leftover pizza waiting at home. Just a few more minutes, and he could call it a day. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jake walked Mr. Johnson out, waving goodbye as the old truck rumbled down the quiet street. He turned back to the garage, ready to clean up and head home. That's when he heard it, a high-pitched whine, growing louder by the second. Jake looked up, shielding his eyes against the fading sunlight. What in the world? A bright light streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. Jake's jaw dropped as he realized it wasn't slowing down. The object, whatever it was heading straight for the empty field behind his garage. Boom! The ground shook as the mysterious object crashed, sending up a cloud of dirt and debris. Jake stumbled, catching himself on the garage door. His heart raced. What just happened? Curiosity overcame caution. Jake grabbed a flashlight from his toolbox and jogged towards the field. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in twilight. As he got closer, he could see a deep furrow in the earth, leading to something big. The smoke cleared, revealing a sight that made Jake question his sanity. There, half buried in the dirt, was a gleaming silver spaceship. Not some hobbyist's model rocket or a piece of satellite. A real, honest-to-goodness spaceship, about the size of a small bus. Jake's mind reeled. Aliens? Here, in Millbrook. He pinched himself, sure he must be dreaming. The sharp pain told him otherwise. He approached cautiously, flashlight beam dancing over the ship's smooth surface. No markings, no visible windows, just sleek, otherworldly metal unlike anything he'd ever seen. A hiss of escaping air made Jake jump back. A seam appeared in the ship's side, widening into a doorway. Jake's heart pounded so hard, he thought it might burst out of his chest. He should run, call the police, do something. Anything but stand there like an idiot. But his feet wouldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, eyes wide as a figure emerged from the ship. She, was tall, at least 7 feet. Her skin was a soft blue, almost glowing in the twilight. 4 arms extended from a slender torso, and a mane of silvery hair framed a face that was strikingly beautiful. Large, almond-shaped eyes blinked at Jake, filled with intelligence and was that fear. The alien took a shaky step forward, then stumbled. Without thinking, Jake rushed to catch her. She was surprisingly light in his arms, her skin cool to the touch. "Easy there," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" The alien's eyes widened in surprise. She opened her mouth, and a series of musical clicks and whistles came out. Jake shook his head, not understanding. The alien frowned, then reached up to touch a small device on her neck. She cleared her throat and spoke again, this time in perfect English. "Thank you, Earth person. I am not harmed. My ship, however." She glanced back at the smoking wreck and sighed. Jake helped her stand steady, his mind still trying to process what was happening. "I'm Jake," he said, "because what else do you say to an alien who just crash-landed in your backyard? Welcome to Earth, I guess." The alien's mouth curved into what might have been a smile. "I am Zora, emissary of the Galactic Council, and I find myself in need of your assistance. Jake of Earth." Jake looked from Zara to the ship and back again. His nice, normal Monday had just taken a sharp turn into the twilight zone. But as he met Zora's pleading gaze, he felt a spark of excitement. This was big, bigger than anything that had ever happened in Millbrook, that's for sure. A ship's a ship, right? Jake said with a grin, surprising himself with his own boldness. I'm pretty good with engines. Maybe I can help. Zora's eyes lit up, all four of her hands clasping together in what Jake assumed was a gesture of relief or gratitude. Oh, thank you. My mission is of utmost importance, and I must repair my vessel quickly. As if on cue, a distant siren wailed. Someone must have seen the crash and called it in. Jake made a split-second decision. Quick, let's get your ship into my garage. We can't let anyone else see it. Not yet, anyway. Zora nodded, understanding the need for secrecy. Together, they rushed to the ship. Jake was amazed at how light it was. Some kind of advanced alien material, no doubt. With Zora's 4 arms and Jake's determination, they managed to push the craft into the garage just as the first curious onlookers began to arrive at the field. Jake closed the garage doors, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He turned to face Zora, who was examining her ship with a worried expression. So, Jake said, rubbing his hands together, where do we start? As Zora began explaining the basics of her ship's propulsion system, Jake realized his boring life in Millbrook had just gotten a whole lot more interesting. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of an adventure that would take him far beyond the stars he'd gazed at as a kid. An adventure that would change not just his life, but the fate of 2 worlds. Space problems, Earth solutions. Jake's head was spinning. Just an hour ago, his biggest worry was what toppings to get on his pizza. Now he was standing in his garage next to a real-life alien and her broken spaceship. Zora paced back and forth, all 4 of her arms moving as she talked fast. The Galactic Council meeting is in 3 Earth days, she said. If I'm not there, it could mean war between 5 star systems. Jake whistled. No pressure or anything, right? He walked around the ship, trying to make sense of the strange technology. It looked nothing like the cars he usually fixed. So what exactly is wrong with your ship? Zora touched a panel on the ship's side. It lit up with symbols Jake didn't understand. The quantum flux capacitor is misaligned, she said, and the hyperdrive motivator has a microfracture. Jake blinked. Could you say that in English? Well, simpler English. Zora thought for a moment. It's like, your car's engine is broken, and there's a tiny crack in the fuel tank. Now that, I can understand, Jake said with a grin. He rolled up his sleeves. Let's take a look inside this thing. Zora pressed another panel, and a section of the ship's hull slid open. Jake peered inside, and his jaw dropped. The interior was a maze of glowing tubes, pulsing crystals, and things that defied description. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Wow, Jake breathed. This is a lot. Zora nodded. Our technology is quite advanced. I'm not sure your Earth tools will be of much use. Jake frowned. He wasn't about to give up that easily. Maybe not, but I bet we can figure something out. You know how your ship works, and I know how to fix things. Together, we might just pull this off. Zora's large eyes blinked in surprise. You really think you can help? I can try, Jake said. Now show me this quantum flux thingy. For the next hour, Zora explained the basics of her ship's systems. Jake listened carefully, asking questions and making connections to things he understood. Some of it went over his head, but he was starting to get the general idea. Okay, Jake said finally. I think I see the problem. This part here, he pointed to a crystal that was glowing dimmer than the others. It's not lined up right. And over here, he indicated a hairline crack in a metal tube. That's where your fuel is leaking. Zora clapped her hands excitedly. Yes, that's exactly it. But how do we fix it? Jake scratched his chin, thinking hard. The alignment issue, that's like adjusting a car's timing belt. We need something precise to nudge it back into place. He dug through his toolbox and pulled out a feeler gauge. This might work. Carefully, Jake inserted the thin metal tool into the ship, with Zara guiding him. He gently pushed the crystal until it clicked into place. The glow immediately brightened. "It worked," Zora exclaimed. "You did it." Jake grinned. "One down, one to go. Now for that crack." This problem was trickier. The material of the tube wasn't like anything on Earth. Jake's usual welding tools wouldn't work. "What if we bypassed it?" Jake suggested. "We could run a new line around the damaged section." Zara considered this. It could work, but we don't have any spare tubing that could handle the pressure. Jake snapped his fingers. "I think I know something that might do the trick." He hurried to a shelf and came back with a coil of rubber hose. "This is high-pressure hydraulic line. We use it for heavy machinery. It's not as fancy as your space tubes, but it might hold until you can get home for proper repairs." Zara examined the hose skeptically. "Are you sure it can withstand the energy flow?" "Only one way to find out," Jake said. He got to work, carefully cutting the damaged section out and splicing the rubber hose. It wasn't pretty, but it seemed to fit. "Okay," Jake said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Moment of truth. Try powering it up." Zara pressed a series of buttons on the control panel. The ship hummed to life. Lights flickered on, and a holographic display appeared in the air. Zara's eyes widened as she read the alien text. It's working," she cried. "The energy flow is stable. You did it, Jake. You really did it." Jake let out a whoop of joy. He'd actually fixed a spaceship, with car parts. Their celebration was cut short by a loud banging on the garage door. Jake froze. Zara looked at him in panic. "Jake," a gruff voice called out. "You in there, son? We got reports of something crashing in the field. You see anything?" It was Sheriff Wilson. Jake's mind raced. What was he going to do? "Quick," he whispered to Zara. "Hide in the ship. I'll handle this." As Zara ducked inside her vessel, Jake took a deep breath and opened the garage door. Sheriff Wilson stood there, looking concerned. "Evening, Sheriff," Jake said, trying to sound casual. "What brings you out here so late?" The sheriff peered past Jake into the garage. "Got calls about lights in the sky, a crash. Thought I'd check it out. You been here all night?" Jake nodded, perhaps a bit too eagerly. "Yep, just working late on a special project." Sheriff Wilson's eyes narrowed. What kind of project? Jake's mind went blank. He was a terrible liar. But just then, inspiration struck. It's a surprise for the town's anniversary parade. "Yeah, I'm fixing up an old car to look like a spaceship. You know, for the kids." The sheriff stared at Jake for a long moment. Jake held his breath. Finally, Sheriff Wilson chuckled. "Well, ain't that something? You always were a creative one, Jake. Just don't stay up too late, you hear?" "Yes, sir," Jake said, relief washing over him. "Good night, Sheriff." As the police car drove away, Jake closed the garage door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. Zara emerged from the ship, looking worried. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Jake nodded. "Yeah, but that was too close. We need to get your ship out of here before someone else comes snooping around." Zara's face fell. "But where can we go? I can't risk being seen by your people." Jake thought for a moment, then smiled. "I think I know just the place. How do you feel about camping?" As Jake began explaining his plan to hide the ship in the nearby forest, he realized this adventure was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And somehow, he couldn't wait to see what happened next. Nuts, bolts, and alien bits. The old truck bounced along the bumpy forest road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Jake gripped the steering wheel tightly, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Behind the truck, hidden under a large tarp, was Zora's spaceship. They had managed to hook it up to the truck using some strong chains and a lot of hope. Zara sat in the passenger seat, her forearms wrapped around herself nervously. "Are you sure this is safe, Jake?" she asked. Jake nodded, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Trust me, this old logging road hasn't been used in years. We'll be fine." After what seemed like hours but was really only about 30 minutes, Jake pulled into a small clearing. He cut the engine and let out a sigh of relief. "We made it." They worked together to unhook the ship and push it deeper into the woods, hiding it behind some thick bushes. Jake threw some branches over it for good measure. "Not bad," he said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Now, let's set up camp." Jake had brought along an old tent, some camping gear, and a toolbox full of equipment he thought might be useful. As he started to pitch the tent, Zura walked around the clearing, fascinated by the earth forest. "Your planet is so green," she said, touching the tree trunk gently. "And the air smells different. Fresh." Jake smiled. "Yeah, I guess it is pretty nice out here. We don't appreciate it enough sometimes." He finished setting up the tent and pulled out a portable lantern. "So, ready to get back to work on your ship?" Zara nodded eagerly. They made their way back to the hidden spacecraft, and Jake pulled off the branches. "Okay," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Let's see what else we can fix." For the next few hours, Jake and Zara worked side by side on the ship. Jake was amazed at how quickly he was learning about alien technology. Sure, a lot of it still went over his head, but he was starting to see patterns, to understand the basic principles. "Hand me that, plasma coupler thing," Jake said, pointing to a tool that looked like a cross between a wrench and a glow stick. Zara passed it to him, a smile on her face. "You're learning our terms quickly." Jake shrugged. "It's not so different from Earth stuff. Really. Just shinier, and more likely to explode if I touch the wrong thing." As they worked, they talked. Jake told Zara about growing up in a small town, about his dreams of seeing the world someday. Zara shared stories of her home planet, of the wonders she'd seen across the galaxy. "So, this Galactic Council," Jake said as he tightened a bolt on what he thought was the ship's equivalent of a radiator. "What's it all about?" Zara's face grew serious. "It's a gathering of representatives from all the major civilizations in our sector of the galaxy. We meet to discuss trade, resolve conflicts, share knowledge. This meeting, it's to prevent a war." Jake whistled. "Heavy stuff. No wonder you're in such a hurry to get there." Zara nodded. "Two of our member races are on the brink of conflict over a disputed planet. If I don't arrive with the peace proposal..." She trailed off, looking worried. "Hey," Jake said softly. "We'll get you there, I promise." They worked in silence for a while after that, both lost in thought. Jake was trying to wrap his head around the idea that the fate of entire alien civilizations might depend on him fixing the ship. No pressure, right? As the night wore on, they'd made good progress. The ship's systems were slowly coming back online, one by one. But there were still problems. "The navigation system is completely fried," Zara said, frowning at a holographic display. "Without it, I won't be able to plot a course home." Jake scratched his head. "Navigation, huh? Like GPS?" An idea started to form in his mind. "Hey, what if we hooked up a Earth GPS to your ship? Could that work?" Zara looked skeptical. "Your planet's navigation system is far too primitive to guide an interstellar journey." "Maybe," Jake said, "but it might be enough to get us into orbit. From there, couldn't we use the stars to navigate?" Zara's eyes widened. "That's actually not a bad idea. But how would we connect Earth technology to my ship?" Jake grinned. "Leave that to me. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." For the next hour, Jake worked on jerry-rigging his old smartphone to the ship's control panel. It involved a lot of duct tape, some creative wiring, and more than a little bit of luck. But finally, "I think that's got it," Jake said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Try it now." Zara pressed a few buttons on the control panel. The ship hummed to life, and Jake's phone screen lit up with a map of the area. "It's working," Zara exclaimed. "Jake, you're a genius." Jake blushed. "Nah, just good at improvising. Now let's see what else we can." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest. Jake and Zara froze. "What was that?" Zara whispered. Jake's heart raced. "Probably just an animal," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Another crack, closer this time. Then a voice. "Hello? Is someone out there?" Jake's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice. It was Tommy, his neighbor's kid. The one who was always going on about aliens and UFOs. "Quick," Jake hissed. "Get in the ship. I'll handle this." As Zara ducked into the spacecraft, Jake took a deep breath and stepped out into the clearing. He saw a flashlight beam dancing among the trees, getting closer. "Tommy," he called out. "That you?" The beam swung towards him. "Jake, what are you doing out here?" As Tommy's footsteps drew nearer, Jake's mind raced. How was he going to explain this? And more importantly, how was he going to keep Zara and her ship a secret? The fate of the galaxy might just depend on his next words. "Oh, space trouble." Jake's heart pounded as Tommy's flashlight beam got closer. He had to think fast. "Tommy," Jake called out, trying to sound casual. "What are you doing out here so late?" Tommy, a skinny 15-year-old with wild hair and glasses, burst into the clearing. His eyes were wide with excitement. "I saw lights in the sky," Tommy said breathlessly, "and then I heard weird noises coming from the woods. I knew it. Aliens are real." Jake forced a laugh. "Aliens? Come on, Tommy. You've been watching too many sci-fi movies." Tommy frowned. "But I saw." "Wait, what are you doing out here?" Jake's mind raced. "I'm, camping. Yeah, just needed some time away from the garage, you know." Tommy looked skeptical. In the middle of the night. Just then, a loud beeping noise came from behind the bushes where Zara's ship was hidden. Jake's stomach dropped. Tommy's head snapped towards the sound. What was that? "Probably just my, alarm clock," Jake said quickly. "You know, to wake up for the sunrise." "Listen, Tommy, it's late. You should head home before your parents worry." But Tommy wasn't listening. He was moving towards the bushes, curiosity written all over his face. Jake panicked. "Tommy, wait." Too late. Tommy pushed through the bushes and froze. There, in all its alien glory, was Zora's spaceship, and standing next to it, looking very much not human, was Zora. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Tommy let out a high-pitched squeal of excitement. "I knew it," he shouted. "Aliens are real." Jake groaned. This was not good. Zara, to her credit, handled the situation with grace. She stepped forward, all four hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "Hello, young Earth person," she said softly. "I am Zara. Please don't be afraid." Tommy's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked from Zara to Jake and back again. "Jake," he said finally, "you found an alien and you didn't tell me." Jake sighed. "It's complicated, Tommy. Look, can you keep a secret?" For the next 10 minutes, Jake and Zara explained the situation to Tommy. To Jake's surprise, the teenager took it all in stride. "So you're fixing her ship?" Tommy asked Jake, his eyes shining with admiration. "That's so cool. Can I help?" Before Jake could answer, a loud alarm started blaring from inside the ship. Zara rushed over to the control panel, her face pale. "Oh no," she whispered. "What is it?" Jake asked, worry creeping into his voice. Zara's fingers flew over the controls. "It's a distress signal from the Galactic Council. The peace talks, they've broken down. The war has started." Jake felt his heart sink. "But I thought we had 3 days." Zara shook her head. "The situation must have escalated faster than expected. We need to leave. Now." Jake's mind spun. "Leave? As in, leave Earth?" He looked at Tommy, who was watching them with wide eyes. I can't just leave, Jake said. What about my life here? My job, my family. Zara placed a hand on his shoulder. Jake, I understand. But millions of lives are at stake. Your help could make all the difference. Jake took a deep breath. This was crazy. Absolutely insane. But deep down, he knew what he had to do. Okay, he said. I'm in. But what about Tommy? They all looked at the teenager, who was practically bouncing with excitement. Oh man, can I come too? Please. Tommy begged. Jake shook his head. No way. It's too dangerous. Plus, your parents would freak out. Tommy's face fell. But. No buts, Jake said firmly. But I do need your help. Can you cover for me? Tell everyone I went on a camping trip or something. Tommy nodded solemnly. You can count on me, Jake. As Jake and Zara prepared the ship for takeoff, Tommy helped by keeping watch and bringing them supplies from Jake's truck. Despite the tense situation, Jake couldn't help but smile at the kids' enthusiasm. Finally, everything was ready. The ship's engines hummed to life, lifting it slightly off the ground. Jake turned to Tommy. Remember, not a word to anyone, he said. And take care of my truck, okay? Tommy nodded, his eyes wide with awe. Good luck, Jake. Save the galaxy. Jake chuckled. I'll do my best. He climbed into the ship, squeezing into the cockpit next to Zara. It was a tight fit, clearly not designed for humans. As the door closed, Jake felt a mix of excitement and terror. Ready? Zara asked, her hands hovering over the controls. Jake took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. Zara pressed a button, and the ship rose into the air. Through the view screen, Jake watched as Tommy's figure grew smaller and smaller. The trees of the forest shrank away, then the town of Millbrook, then the whole state. In a matter of minutes, they were leaving Earth's atmosphere. Jake gasped as he saw his home planet from space for the first time. It was beautiful, a blue marble hanging in the vastness of space. Wow, he whispered. But there was no time to admire the view. As soon as they cleared the atmosphere, alarms started blaring again. What now? Jake asked, his stomach churning. Zara's face was grim. We've got company. Look. Jake peered out the view screen. His jaw dropped. 3 sleek, menacing-looking ships were approaching fast. Friends of yours? He asked weakly. Zara shook her head. Bounty hunters. They must have picked up my distress signal. The ships were getting closer. Jake saw flashes of light that he realized with horror were weapons being fired. Hang on, Zara shouted. She yanked on the controls, and their ship dove into a stomach-churning spiral. Jake gripped his seat, his knuckles turning white. As laser blasts streaked past them, Jake had one thought. What have I gotten myself into? Beat the clock. Jake's stomach lurched as Zara's ship spun through space, dodging laser blasts from the bounty hunters. He gripped his seat tightly, knuckles white. Can't this thing go any faster? Jake yelled over the blaring alarms. Zara's 4 hands flew over the controls. I'm trying, but the repairs aren't finished. We're not at full power. A blast rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from a nearby panel. Jake's heart raced. He had to do something. Let me try, he said, reaching for what looked like the ship's equivalent of a steering wheel. Zara hesitated for a split second, then nodded. Okay, but be careful. Jake grabbed the controls. They felt strange in his hands, nothing like a car's steering wheel. But as he moved them, he felt the ship respond. It's like a video game, he muttered. Then, louder. Hang on. Jake pulled hard to the right, sending their ship into a tight spiral. The bounty hunter's shots flew past them, missing by inches. He pushed forward, and their ship dove, then pulled up sharply. The sudden moves made Jake's head spin, but he grinned. They were still alive. Jake, that's amazing, Zara exclaimed. Where did you learn to fly like that? Jake laughed nervously. I didn't, but I've played a lot of space shooter games. For a few minutes, they weaved through the stars, staying just ahead of their pursuers. But Jake could see on the screens that the bounty hunters were catching up. We need a plan, he said. We can't outrun them forever. Zara nodded, her face grim. You're right. We need to lose them long enough to make a jump to hyperspace. Jake blinked. Hyperspace. Like in the movies. Similar, Zara said. But we need at least 2 minutes without being shot at to power up the drive. Jake's mind raced. 2 minutes. It might as well be 2 hours with those bounty hunters on their tail. Then he had an idea. What's that? He asked, pointing to a cluster of large rocks floating in space ahead of them. An asteroid field, Zara replied. But it's too dangerous. We could crash. Jake grinned. Maybe for them. But I've got an idea. Trust me. Zara looked at him for a moment, then nodded. I trust you, Jake. Jake took a deep breath and pushed the ship towards the asteroids. The bounty hunters followed close behind. Here goes nothing, Jake muttered. He weaved the ship between the huge rocks, his hands moving almost on instinct. Left, right, up, down. The asteroids whizzed by, some close enough to touch. Behind them, they heard explosions as their pursuers struggled to keep up. It's working, Zora shouted. 2 of the ships have pulled back. But the third bounty hunter was still on their tail, matching Jake's every move. Sweat dripped down Jake's forehead as he concentrated. They needed to shake this last ship. Suddenly, Jake saw it. 2 massive asteroids were slowly moving towards each other. Between them was a gap, but it was closing fast. Zara, he said, get ready with that hyperspace thing. We're going through there. He pointed at the gap. Zara's eyes widened. Jake, that's insane. We'll be crushed. Just trust me, Jake said. And maybe close your eyes. He pushed the ship to its limit, racing towards the narrowing gap. The bounty hunter followed, gaining on them. Alarms blared as the asteroids loomed larger and larger. Now, Jake yelled. At the last possible second, he cut the engines and spun the ship sideways. They slipped through the gap with inches to spare. Behind them, they heard a massive explosion as the bounty hunter's ship smashed into the asteroids. We did it, Jake whooped. Zara was already working the controls, preparing for hyperspace jump. Hold on tight. The stars outside the windows stretched into lines of light. There was a moment of intense pressure, and then calm. They were in hyperspace. Jake let out a long breath and slumped in his seat. His hands were shaking. That was intense. Zara put a hand on his shoulder. Jake, that was incredible. You saved us. Jake smiled weakly. Thanks. So, how long until we reach this galactic council? Zara's face grew serious. About 6 hours. But Jake, we have a problem. She pointed to a flashing red light on the control panel. Jake's heart sank. He was starting to recognize what those lights meant. What is it? The hyperspace drive was damaged in the chase, Zara explained. It's leaking energy. At this rate, we have maybe 5 hours before it fails completely. Jake did the math. So we're going to drop out of hyperspace, an hour before we reach the council. Zara nodded grimly. And we'll be stranded in unknown space, with no way to complete our journey. Jake felt a wave of despair wash over him. After everything they'd been through, were they going to fail now? But then he remembered Tommy's words, save the galaxy, and he thought of all the lives depending on them. Jake sat up straight. Then we've got 5 hours to fix it. Show me how this hyperspace drive works. Zora looked at him in surprise. Jake, this is extremely advanced technology. Even I don't fully understand how it works. Jake grinned. Hey, I fixed your ship with duct tape and a smartphone. I can figure this out. We got a galaxy to save, remember? As Zara began explaining the basics of hyperspace technology, Jake rolled up his sleeves. They had 5 hours to do the impossible. The clock was ticking. Zoom, zoom, escape. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead as he stared at the mess of wires and glowing crystals that made up the hyperspace drive. For the past 4 hours, he and Zara had been working non-stop to fix the leak. "Hand me that." "A space wrench thing," Jake said, pointing to a tool that looked like a cross between a screwdriver and a lightsaber. Zara passed it to him. "It's called a quantum spanner." "And Jake, we're running out of time." Jake nodded grimly. They had less than an hour left before the drive failed. "I know, but I think I've almost got it." He carefully adjusted a crystal, watching as the energy flow changed on Zara's holographic display. "There. How's that look?" Zara's eyes widened. "The leak is slowing." "Jake, you did it." Jake grinned, but his celebration was short-lived. A loud alarm started blaring through the ship. "What now?" he groaned. Zara rushed to the control panel. Her face paled. "We're about to drop out of hyperspace. The drive is shutting down." Jake's stomach dropped. "But we fixed the leak. Why is it?" He was cut off as the ship lurched violently. The streaks of light outside the window suddenly turned back into stars. They were back in normal space. "Where are we?" Jake asked, looking out at the unfamiliar star field. Zara checked the navigation system. Oh no. What? What is it?" "We're in the middle of the war zone," Zara said quietly. As if on cue, they saw flashes of light in the distance. Explosions. Laser fire. The war had already started. Jake's mind raced. "Okay, don't panic. How far are we from the Galactic Council?" Zara did some quick calculations. "About 30 minutes at top speed." "But Jake, look." She pointed out the window. Jake's jaw dropped. 2 massive fleets of ships were facing off against each other, and they were right in the middle. "Can we go around them?" Jake asked. Zara shook her head. "It would take too long. We have to go through." Jake took a deep breath. "All right then. Let's do this." He took the controls, guiding their small ship towards the chaos ahead. As they got closer, they could see the scale of the battle. Huge battleships fired at each other, while swarms of smaller fighters zipped around them. "This is insane," Jake muttered. They weaved through the battle, narrowly dodging laser blasts and debris. Jake's hands were sweating on the controls, but he kept his focus. Left, right, up, down. It was just like the asteroid field, he told himself. Just a really angry, exploding asteroid field. Suddenly, a stray shot hit their ship. Alarms blared as they started to spin out of control. "We're hit," Zara yelled. "The main engine is down." Jake's mind raced. They were sitting ducks without the engine. Then he had an idea. "Zara, can we use the hyperspace drive to give us a boost?" Zara looked at him like he was crazy. "The drive isn't meant for normal space travel. It could tear the ship apart." "Do we have a choice?" Jake asked. Zara hesitated, then shook her head. "You're right. I'll reroute power to the drive. But Jake, we'll only have one shot at this. The drive will burn out completely after a few seconds." Jake nodded. "Then we better make it count." Zara's hands flew over the controls. "Ready. Now." Jake pushed the hyperspace control. The ship lurched forward with incredible speed. Stars blurred around them as they shot through the battle like a bullet. Ships and laser blasts whizzed by in a dizzying blur. Jake could barely keep up, relying more on instinct than sight to guide them. The ship shuddered and groaned under the stress. "We're not going to make it," Zara shouted over the noise. "Yes, we are," Jake yelled back. He could see the edge of the battle ahead, just a little further. With a final burst of speed, they shot clear of the fighting. The hyperspace drive gave out with a loud bang, sending sparks flying from the control panel. But they were through. Jake and Zara looked at each other, breathing hard. Then they both started laughing in relief. "I can't believe that worked," Zara said, shaking her head in amazement. Jake grinned. Never underestimate human crazy ideas. Their celebration was cut short by a new alarm. Jake groaned. Now what? Zara checked the systems. We're losing power fast. That last jump fried most of our circuits. Jake's heart sank. Can we make it to the Galactic Council? Zara did some quick calculations. Maybe. If we shut down everything except life support and minimal propulsion. Do it, Jake said. They worked quickly, shutting down system after system. The lights dimmed, the artificial gravity flickered off, and most of the control panels went dark. As the last systems powered down, Jake looked out the window. In the distance, he could see a space station. It was massive, shaped like a giant wheel with spokes leading to a central hub. Is that it? He asked. Zara nodded. The Galactic Council headquarters. We're almost there. They drifted towards the station, running on the last dregs of power. Jake held his breath as they got closer and closer. Would they make it? Just as their ship's last system was about to fail, a tractor beam from the station locked onto them, pulling them in. Jake let out a whoop of joy. We did it. Zara smiled, relief clear on her face. We did. Thank you, Jake. You've saved millions of lives today. As their battered ship was pulled into the docking bay of the Galactic Council station, Jake felt a mix of exhaustion and excitement. They had made it against all odds. But as he saw the alien figures rushing towards their ship, he realized their adventure was far from over. In fact, it might be just beginning. Welcome to Planet Zoop. Jake's head was spinning, and it wasn't just from the artificial gravity kicking back in. The last few hours had been a whirlwind of debriefings, medical checkups, and meetings with important-looking aliens. Zara had been whisked away almost immediately, leaving Jake to face the curious stares of the Galactic Council members alone. Now finally, he found himself in a quiet room, looking out a large window at the stars. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Zara walked in. Jake, she said, her face lighting up. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. Are you all right? Jake nodded, smiling. I'm fine. Just overwhelmed. What's happening? Zara's expression turned serious. The council has reviewed our report. Thanks to the information we brought, they've managed to negotiate a temporary ceasefire. It's not a permanent solution, but it's a start. Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. So we did it. We stopped the war. For now, Zara said, but there's still a lot of work to do. She paused, looking slightly nervous, which brings me to why I'm here. The council. They want to thank you for your help. Jake raised an eyebrow. Thank me? How? Zara grinned. They want to offer you a tour of my home planet, Zoop. It's a great honor. No human has ever been there before. Jake's jaw dropped. Are you serious? That's... wow. So you'll come? Zara asked eagerly. Jake laughed. Are you kidding? Of course I'll come. The journey to Planet Zoop took several days, even with the advanced alien technology. Jake spent the time learning more about Zara's culture and trying, mostly failing, to pronounce alien words. Finally, the ship's captain announced they were approaching Zoop. Jake rushed to the window, his heart pounding with excitement. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Jake gasped. The sky was a deep purple, with two suns hanging low on the horizon. The landscape below was like nothing he'd ever seen. Forests of what looked like giant, glowing mushrooms stretched as far as the eye could see. In the distance, he could make out a city of spiraling crystal towers that seemed to defy gravity. Welcome to Zoop, Zara said softly, coming to stand beside him. As they disembarked, Jake was hit by a wave of new sensations. The air smelled sweet, like a mix of flowers he couldn't name. The gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth's, making each step feel bouncy. A group of aliens that looked similar to Zara, but with different colored skin, approached them. They bowed deeply to Zara, and then turned to Jake with obvious curiosity. One of them stepped forward. "Welcome, Jake of Earth. I am Klex, chief of the Zoop Welcoming Committee. We are honored to have you as our guest." Jake bowed awkwardly, trying to remember the greeting Zora had taught him. Zoop soup to you too." Klex's eyes widened, and then he burst out laughing. The other aliens joined in, their laughter sounding like tinkling bells. "Oh my," Klex said, wiping his eyes. "Zora, you didn't tell us your human friend was so funny." Jake shot a confused look at Zora, who was trying hard not to laugh herself. "I may have taught you the wrong greeting," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed giggles. "You just told them you have itchy tentacles." Jake felt his face turn red, but he couldn't help laughing too. Well, I guess it broke the ice. The next few days were a whirlwind of new experiences. Jake tried foods that changed color as he ate them and drinks that made him temporarily float. He visited schools where young Zoopians learned subjects like quantum botany and temporal ethics. One evening, Zara took him to the top of the tallest crystal tower in the city. As they looked out over the glowing landscape, Jake felt a sudden pang of homesickness. "It's beautiful," he said, "but I miss Earth. My family must be so worried." Zora put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I understand. And I have news about that. The Council has developed a plan to return you home." Jake turned to her, surprised. "Really? How?" "We can create a wormhole," Zora explained. "It will take you back to Earth, to the exact moment you left. No time will have passed there." Jake's mind reeled. "That's amazing." But he looked at Zora, feeling torn. "I don't know if I'm ready to leave all this behind." Zara smiled softly. "You don't have to decide right now. And Jake, there's something else. The Council was very impressed with you. They're offering you a position as Earth's first official representative to the Galactic Council." Jake's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a mechanic." "A mechanic who helped save the galaxy," Zara reminded him. "You've shown bravery, quick thinking, and an ability to adapt to new situations. That's exactly what we need." Jake looked back out at the alien landscape, his mind spinning with possibilities. Stay here, among the stars, exploring new worlds, or return to his quiet life on Earth. As the twin suns of Zoop set, painting the sky in breathtaking colors, Jake realized he had a big decision to make. Whatever he chose, he knew his life would never be the same again. "So," Zara said gently, "what do you think? Are you ready for more adventures in space?" Jake took a deep breath, looking out at the vast, beautiful unknown before him. His answer would change everything. But deep down, he already knew what he was going to say. Stay or go. Jake stood on the balcony of his guest quarters, watching the 3 moons of Zoop rise in the purple sky. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The past week had been the most amazing and terrifying experience of his life. Now he had to make the biggest decision he'd ever faced. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open, and Zora walked in. "Have you decided?" she asked gently. Jake sighed. "I don't know. It's a lot to think about." Zara nodded understandingly. Perhaps it would help to talk it through. Jake smiled gratefully. Yeah, maybe it would. They sat down on the strange, cloud-like chairs that Jake had grown fond of. He took a deep breath and started to speak. On one hand, the idea of staying here, being Earth's representative, it's incredible. I get to see things no human has ever seen, learn about technologies we can't even imagine. I could help bring Earth into a whole new era. Zara nodded encouragingly. You would be an excellent ambassador, Jake. Your curiosity and adaptability have impressed everyone here. Jake felt a flush of pride at her words, but then he frowned. But on the other hand, Earth is my home. I have a family there, friends, a whole life, and they don't even know where I am. If I stay, I'd be leaving everything behind. He stood up and paced the room, his thoughts spilling out. And what about Earth itself? We're not ready for all this. The technology, the aliens, the idea that we're not alone in the universe. It could cause panic, or worse. Zara listened patiently. When Jake finally fell silent, she spoke. These are all valid concerns, Jake. But remember, if you choose to return, we can send you back to the moment you left. You wouldn't have to explain your absence. Jake nodded. I know, but I'd still know. I'd have all this knowledge, these experiences. How could I just go back to fixing cars after seeing all this? He gestured at the alien cityscape outside his window. Zara stood up and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Jake, whatever you decide, know that you have made a difference. Your actions helped prevent a war. You've shown the Council that humans are capable of great things. That alone is a tremendous achievement. Jake smiled at her. Thanks, Zara, for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Just then, there was another chime at the door. This time, it was Klex who entered. Apologies for the interruption, Klex said, but there's something you need to see, Jake. Curious and a little worried, Jake followed Klex and Zara to the communications center of the Galactic Council's Zoop headquarters. A large screen dominated one wall, currently showing a familiar blue and green planet. Earth? Jake asked, confused. Klex nodded. We've been monitoring your planet's communications. There's something you should hear. He pressed a button, and suddenly the room was filled with a cacophony of human voices. News reports, social media posts, phone calls, all talking about the same thing. Unexplained lights in the sky. Government denies knowledge of any extraterrestrial activity. Amateur video shows what appears to be a spacecraft. Jake's eyes widened as he realized what he was hearing. They saw us. When we left Earth, they saw the ship. Zara looked worried. This complicates things. Earth wasn't supposed to become aware of extraterrestrial life yet. Jake listened to more of the reports. There was excitement, fear, confusion. People demanding answers. Government scrambling to respond. He thought about Tommy, probably in the middle of it all, knowing the truth but unable to tell anyone. Suddenly, Jake knew what he had to do. He turned to Zara and Klex. I need to go back. They both looked surprised. Zara started to speak, but Jake held up a hand. Not permanently, he explained, but Earth needs help navigating this. They need someone who understands what's really going on, someone who can help ease them into the idea of a wider universe. Understanding dawned on Zara's face. You want to be that someone? Jake nodded. I can be the bridge between Earth and the Galactic Council. I can help prepare my people for what's coming. And then, when the time is right, I can come back here and take on the role of Earth's official representative. Klex looked impressed. That's a wise and brave decision, Jake. But it won't be easy. You'll be dealing with scared and suspicious people, powerful individuals who might see you as a threat. I know, Jake said, but it's the right thing to do. Earth is my home. I have to help. Zara smiled proudly. Then we'll support you however we can. We can provide you with some basic technology to help you communicate with us, and information to help you explain things to your leaders. Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had made his decision, and it felt right. So, he said with a grin, how soon can we get that wormhole ready? The next few hours were a blur of preparations. Jake was given a crash course in diplomatic relations, a small device that would allow him to contact the Council in emergencies, and a data chip full of information to help him explain the situation to Earth's leaders. As he stood in front of the shimmering portal that would take him home, Jake felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Zara stood beside him. Are you ready? She asked. Jake took a deep breath and nodded. As I'll ever be. See you soon, Zara. With one last look at the wonders of Zoop, Jake stepped into the portal. There was a flash of light, a sensation of falling, and then he was back in the forest clearing where his adventure had begun. In the distance, he could hear sirens and see flashing lights. Taking a deep breath, Jake started walking towards the commotion. It was time to introduce Earth to the rest of the universe.